Hello everyone and welcome to another video now. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are again. As you regular viewers know, every year I like to look back at the GTX 750 Ti, my all-time favourite graphics card, to see just how well it's holding up with modern games. We have seen many big releases this year, games that continue to put pressure not just on budget graphics cards but high-end options too. Back in 2014, the 750 Ti was the sensible mid-range choice. It didn't cost too much, so it allowed those like me with not too much to spend on a PC to experience my favourite games at 60 frames per second with delightful visuals to boot. Of course, this wasn't consistently the case, but the card handled games better than my PlayStation did anyway. As of 2019, there are many newer low-cost options to choose from, and prices of older flagships have seen huge cuts on the used markets. Entry-level cards like this even more so. I paid £50 for my Asus OC edition here, which offers faster clock speeds than the standard model, as well as better cooling and silent idle operation. It does, however, require one 6-pin connector, which isn't the case with all models, and it was the lack of a 6-pin requirement that made the 750 Ti a very attractive proposition all those years ago. I say all those years ago, but it was about 5 years ago. So, how does it fare these days? Can it still manage acceptable performance at 1080p, or is this card better suited to lower resolutions? Well, let's get into it. So I started with Rage 2, which can be difficult for some GPUs to handle, and the 750 Ti was certainly not up to the task at Full HD. The game failed to exceed 20 FPS at the low settings here. I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest, as the 750 Ti isn't included in a lot of benchmark tests from many online reviewers these days, so I had nothing to make comparisons with. Moving towards settlements actually improved the frame rate a little, but not really to playable levels. 900p on the other hand meant our average shot up to 30. I believe this is what modern consoles run the game at, though visually it looks worse here. Throughout this video you'll see that 900p tends to be the sweet spot for the 750 Ti in 2019, and 720p even better. Speaking of which, the 750 Ti at 720p resolution meant a small increase in performance once again, but nothing significant. The card is maxing out at any resolution here. Still, if you bought this GPU way back when and you want to play some Rage 2, go right ahead as long as you don't mind 30 FPS with low settings. Now I actually let the Nvidia GeForce experience choose the settings of the games today by clicking Optimize in the control panel. It just so happened to select low a lot of the time, most of the time. As we move on to Apex Legends, you'll notice how while the game is playable at low once again, the 750 Ti won't quite allow us to maintain at least 60 FPS at Full HD. With online multiplayer games I would personally prefer a 60 FPS average, as it's a competitive environment, but this still felt fine most of the time, to be honest, as it was very close after all. I'm just being a little bit picky. At 900p, a solid 60 FPS was much more realistic, and just like before, this seems to be the sweet spot. For a card that can be picked up for $50, pounds or euros, that's not too bad. And it will still make a suitable upgrade to an old Dell OEM machine or the like. 720p guarantees a constantly high frame rate that sometimes shoots above and beyond 100 FPS. You could certainly turn the visual settings up here if you wanted, but I kept things the same throughout for a fairer comparison. Apex Legends is a success on the 2GB GTX 750 Ti. Who knows what further updates will bring though, and what impact they have on performance. GeForce Experience decided medium was the best for Dirt 2, and what a great choice it was. Even at 1080p, an average of 60 FPS during this time trial race wasn't an unrealistic target to hit, though swapping a few options too low will guarantee higher percentile figures, ensuring less frame dips. Not that there were any noticeable hiccups during my benchmarking test. As expected then, 900p ran absolutely fine too, with an extra 10 to 15 frames per second being squeezed from the card. Unfortunately, this does not improve my driving, which is beyond help. 720p also ran well. Dirt Rally 2 is a success at all resolutions on the Asus 2GB 750 Ti. Next up I ran the benchmark test in Gears of War 5, firstly at 1080p, sort of. Again, the Nvidia program recommended low, and again this was a seemingly ideal configuration, with the benchmark run returning an average of 50. However, the minimum FPS setting, I realised after I tested this game, was on, as per Nvidia's optimal settings, so the game will run at a lower internal resolution to try and target 60. I then dropped things to 900p and observed a similar average, though this time we edged closer to that magic number. I don't have a 720p benchmark for you here, as the game decided to crash halfway through the benchmark run at this resolution every time, but it seems as though it was heading for 60 frames per second, judging from what I was seeing briefly on screen. In the future, I'll run benchmarks with the minimum FPS setting off. It just so happened to be switched on automatically from the Nvidia control panel. Last year, Kingdom Come Deliverance would never have run this well on a 750 Ti, but now it's a sure thing. Granted, there are drops here and there, but nothing too significant with the low settings. I took a stroll around this little town, which is also a pretty demanding area of the game, and it's where the game begins, and things stayed above 30 frames per second, though you can most certainly forget about 60 here. 900p puts this average closer to 50, a very nice improvement once again, backing up my claim that 900p is the sweet spot. The great thing about this game is that it looks good at any graphical setting, and it's certainly one worth playing if you haven't done so already. 720p then, and well, 60 FPS came and went. I even got myself in a fight, a very stupid one because I stole an axe, though for some reason I didn't think to equip it as the guards swung at me with their weapons drawn. You can imagine how this played out in the end, but I was just happy to be seeing such a smooth frame rate with this card. KCD is a success at lower resolutions, and I'd happily play the game throughout with this GPU. Metro Exodus was my main worry here. While the benchmark run produces pretty bad results, actual gameplay tells a far better story. 1080p was a little too much for the card, in all honesty. I played through this opening level 3 times over at each resolution to get a sense of performance. 900p improved things quite a bit. There was still the occasional drop toward 30, but the game stayed pretty solid over the course of this scene. It seems the days of 1080p gaming on a 750 Ti are nearing an end, but long live 900p, eh? So then, 720p should fare better again, right? Well, that's exactly the case. A very nice attempt from the 750 Ti here. Maybe I'm biased. In fact, I know I'm biased. I love this card, but so far it's done better than I thought it would in most cases. Finally, we have No Man's Sky. I know this is an old game that came out in about 2016, but it's been receiving updates ever since, and the latest Beyond update makes it feel like a whole other game. It also looks and runs different these days too, so any benchmarks of the game back in 2016 will likely be very different to 2019. It's still quite demanding though. Even though it has its own unassuming yet fantastic art style, this game will put a strain on a lot of hardware, and that's why I decided to test it with this card. I'm really getting back into this title, and I think it's certainly worth another go, because the updates are free after all, so if you already purchased it, you should have this latest Beyond update. Wow, that sounded like an advertisement for this game. I have not been paid by anyone to try and make you get No Man's Sky. Let me just put that out there now. I'm just excited about it because I rediscovered it after all these years. So, yeah, but anyway, the 750 Ti runs it okay. It will struggle at 1080p a little bit, and it's actually more demanding than it looks, this game. So I mean, that's all there is to say with the 750 Ti in mind. It's about 5 years old now, and it will still do an okay job at those lower resolutions. 900p seems to be the sweet spot for the card. 1080p is doable in some instances, provided you don't mind 30 FPS, though if you want to guarantee yourself closer to 60, 720p would have to be the way to go. Personally, I'd prefer getting around the middle of those two results, maybe about 40 to 45 FPS with 900p, something like that, but how you play and what settings you choose is totally up to you. I think that for the price of £50, $50 or €50, a very common price of the 750 Ti in 2019, well, it may still be worth it if you have an OEM Dell, Lenovo or HP system that's in desperate need of a graphical upgrade, and you don't really have a power supply that will provide sufficient power for anything else. Of course it's worth considering your options, and I'd have to recommend getting a 750 Ti without an extra 6-pin connector, simply for convenience purposes. But with all that said, well, I hope you enjoyed the look back at this card. If you did, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you're still rocking the 750 Ti in your system and how it works out for you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.